Welcome to Season 5 of Your Bird Story, a podcast about everyday people and their relationships and interactions with wild birds. I'm your host, Georgia Silvera Seamans. Since my conversation with Jeffrey Train for this episode, the City Council of Hoboken designated the Common Tern Hoboken's honorary bird. Congratulations to Jeffrey Train and the members of the group Our Tern. You can find more information at www.ourtern.com. That's www.ourtern.com. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Your Bird Story. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Jeffrey Train, and I'm going to turn the mic over to Jeffrey so he can introduce himself to you all.
Hi, Georgia. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Jeffrey Train. I also go by Mr. Train. Mr. Train's Life Lessons for Better Birding and Beyond. I live, bird, teach, and coach in Hoboken, New Jersey. And my goal is really to introduce young people, families to the joy of birding and really introducing them through the lens of positive psychology. So exploring ideas of kindness, gratitude, and connecting that to our feathered friends and helping people to just pay more attention to the joy that's kind of all around them.
What was the catalyst for this approach?
Great question. So I teach a positive psychology course. I have a counseling degree. And I would say that all birders kind of talk about their spark birds. Mm-hmm. I've had multiple sparks. And one of my enjoyments as a teacher and coach is to kind of really incite sparks, basically. I kind of think of myself as like the flint and the steel. And my actual spark bird was a red-tailed hawk. But I had a second spark with a red-tailed hawk that I rescued. And that really got me motivated, interested in helping to save birds' lives just as much as enjoying them. And one of the ways that I did that was by kind of rallying support with the community and getting more and more people to focus on the avian life around them. And for me, because I live in Hoboken, it kind of seemed like a natural outgrowth. And then being a teacher of positive psychology, basically anything that I learn about, anything that I become passionate about, it's my natural inclination to teach it. I want to share it with others. And I had a walk scheduled for, I believe, March 15th, 2020. And it was going to be a community walk. Kids had all signed up, families had all signed up. And then, of course, that didn't happen. I started making these videos and kind of just teaching people, hey, what are some birds that you can see just looking out your window? And through that, I started cultivating really kind of like a personality that's really who I am in the classroom, working with teenagers, young people. And taking what I teach in my positive psychology class and kind of really pointing it out in the moment as we go birding together with young people.
A couple of things going backwards a little bit. Can you provide some details about the rescue of that red-tailed hawk? What did that entail?
Yeah, absolutely. The caveat is, as a teacher, I have nightmares at the end of the summer. And usually the nightmare is it's back to school night and I have somehow overslept and I missed that night. And so on the day of my back to school night where I teach, because I live, an hour away from where I work, I didn't go home. And I have a friend there who's a birding mentor. We said, hey, why don't we go birding, after school? We'll go see some birds and then we'll come back for back to school night. So we went to the Greenbrook Nature Center. It's on the Palisades Parkway in New York. We went in and we were making our way down by this little pond. And all of a sudden, we saw a red-tailed hawk being chased by 2 or 3 blue jays. It wasn't flying; it was kind of hurtling through the air, and it came in, landed in like the crotch of a tree, upside down. Its foot got stuck, and it was flapping. It was able to finally get itself out, came to the ground, and immediately, this was just after the report on the state of the birds had come out, which really impressed upon me how really every single bird was important, right? Because so many birds are being lost. And through that lens, I said, we have to help. We have to find out what's going on here. I had initially thought that it was like a broken wing. And so my friend and I got close, and close enough that we could see, she was struggling. She was able to fly a little bit. We stopped, we talked about it. And I said, we have to try to help her to get her to the Raptor Trust or some sanctuary, something like that. And I'll never forget my friend. He said, you don't understand. This is a red-tailed hawk with these razor-sharp talons. She's going to, tear your arms. How are you going to do this? And at this point, I'm just wearing a collared shirt, t-shirt. I do some thinking. I realize in my car, I brought a couple extra pairs of pants for back to school night. I had a seat cover. So I run up to my car and I wrap the seat cover around my arm, and then another pair of pants around my other arm. And I come down, the bird is still there. And now she's kind of walked into a swamp. So I step in, and I'll never forget my friend, as he tightens up the wraps around my arm, he looks at me resolved, and he just goes, okay, to help out. I start wading into the swamp, and all of a sudden my feet go down to about my knees. I'm caked in mud. And oh, by the way, back to school night starts in, like in an hour and a half or something.
Of course.
So I start talking to the bird, hey, I'm a birder. I'm here to help you. And for me, it was actually one of these special moments where she kind of looked at me, and it felt like she was like, okay, this person's here to help. And she didn't move a muscle. I was able to put my hands around her wings and picked her up, and turned out I didn't even need, the coverings for my arms, and brought her back to my friend. And now, we're both 2 teachers with back to school night in about an hour and a half, an hour and 45, and we have a hawk in our hands. So now what? We go back up to the car, and I said, well, in the town where I teach, there's a pet store. Maybe they have a cage, and we can put her in there. And then in the morning, I can get her to the Raptor Trust. And so there we are, driving down the Palisades Parkway. I have a red-tailed hawk on my lap, and I'm kind of reminiscing, telling her about how I broke my leg a year before that, and I healed, so she can get better as well. They'll fix her right up. My friend is hurrying down the highway. We get to the pet store. They come out. They actually give us a bird cage. They sell birds there. And they said, you know what? There's a place right down the road, across the border in, I believe, Spring Valley, New York. And they actually take in birds. So it was about, 25 minutes to get there. We're looking at the clock. We start debating. And again, I'll never forget this. She says, if you argue about it, you're not going to make it. Just go. And my friend and I just get in the car. We take off. We make it to the center. We drop the bird off, and we head back, and we make it into the building for back to school night. The evening has already begun. Parents are in the auditorium. I kind of sneak back in. Have you ever seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off?
Yes.
So, at the end when the principal, Edward Rooney, his clothes are all shredded, and that's essentially what my pants look like. And so I'm entering the building, on the side, sneaking in. I was able to get into a locker room, shower, change. And we were just so elated from that night in that situation, made it back with back to school night to spare. Of course, I checked in on the bird multiple days. Unfortunately, we came to call her Dawn. So her name was Dawn. And Dawn did not make it. It took about 3 days. When I called the center, they said they suspect West Nile virus. I had spoken to somebody after who said that kind of West Nile virus kind of works the same way as lead poisoning on birds. It was really, really, really sad But that situation was so meaningful and precious to me, and I really saw that it's really important to be on the lookout to support these creatures. And that got me learning about, West Nile virus and lead in the water system, and trying to educate people, who come on my bird walks and things like that, and having conversations like this. And, I think now of how many other bird stories, the name of your podcast, Your Bird Story. I've had so many, and they all kind of began with Dawn. And so she was the quote unquote dawn of a new beginning in my bird story.
What I don't know, wonderful and special experience you had with that red-tailed hawk. As you were telling the story, I was picturing it as a children's book. You're a very good storyteller, so thank you for sharing that with us. So you teach positive psychology. What are some of the emotional benefits that you see people benefiting from when they go out to watch birds?
Wonderful question. First and foremost, it's engaging with the natural world. I always tell people just leads to joy and gratitude. When I do a bird walk, the first question that I'll ask is take a minute and think about, how do you feel right now? Totally subjective, 1 through 10, 1 through 5, pick a specific emotion. And then I ask the same question at the end of the bird walk. And always, people will respond, oh my goodness, I feel so much better. I went from this number to this number. And that's just, I think, the beauty of stepping outside, looking around, paying attention, and starting to see things that you didn't notice yesterday. And so that engagement with joy and curiosity, it kind of becomes infectious. And then with that, I really believe that gratitude follows along with that. This week, I was in my room, and it was just a regular day, and I'm just hearing all of these sounds outside, right? The house sparrows and the starlings, and we heard a black and white warbler, and it's just such a surprise, right? And it really kind of takes you from out of your head and into the moment. And this time of year in particular is so magnificent with the activity of all the birds. It feels like a treat. And again, kind of one of my favorite things about, doing these walks and connecting with people is seeing other people have that inspiration, right? Seeing parents and children, hearing the stories, oh my goodness, we never used to notice the birds when we walked to school. And now, that's all we notice. And that brings more connection during their walk. That brings more awareness as they kind of go through their lives. And I think that's really special. Something else that I do want to talk about is I've really developed this other side that birding is a way to kind of build a beginner-minded attitude, to be more comfortable making mistakes and kind of enjoying the process of growth. Because as you go through the process of learning about birds, you're able to really learn a lot of key lessons.
What are some of those lessons?
So I have 3 big mistakes that I think all birders need to make. And of course, if you want to share, you can kind of chime in and tell me your stories about them. So one of the words is, and I'm sure you've heard this before, dipping, missing on a bird.
Oh, I have not heard about dipping.
Oh, all right. I love it. So dipping is any time that you leave your house with the goal of seeing a specific bird and you miss. So, you could step outside to go see the blue grosbeak. Perhaps there was just a blue grosbeak in Manhattan, right? So I was lucky enough to see it. Were you able to see it?
I did see the grosbeak in the East Village.
Oh, yep.
Yeah.
Let's say there was somebody in the city. They set out with the goal of seeing the blue grosbeak, and they go there and it's just not there, right? That's a negative feeling, that disappointment. But you learn so much from your dips, right? So it could be you need to wake up earlier in the morning. Could be you got to keep trying. You got to go back. Also, I think it's healthy and beneficial to have that experience of missing something, and that helps you to be more appreciative and grateful for all the abundant times that you do see birds, right? And I think for birders, can you give me an example of a bird that you dipped on where, you were planning to go see this bird and didn't get to see it?
Yes, I think there are two times. Now, can I remember the name of the birds? One was a female painted bunting, I believe, at Brooklyn Bridge Park.
Beautiful.
Did not get to see her, but I did get to spend time with a friend, and that was wonderful. The other time was a bird, I forget the species. The bird's yellow and black. If it comes to me, I'll include it in the show notes, but it was in Riverside Park. My family and I went there. They dropped me off. I walked into the forest and I saw a bunch of birder people. This was very early on in my birding life.
Yes.
They were not super welcoming, and I did not see the evening grosbeak. I think that's right. But it made me appreciate the supportive birders in my life.
That's wonderful. And that's going to lead you to be that much more supportive of other birders as well.
Yeah.
Yes. Have you seen an even grosbeak later on in your birding career?
No.
Oh.
I was lucky to see a Kentucky warbler. Well, not that I keep dipping on the prothonotary warbler, but I'm not really a twitcher. I mean, I have twitched, but I try not to. So hence I keep missing the prothonotary.
Sure. You're more of a mindful birder.
Yeah, I have my patch and I really like to hang out in my patch. If it's the blue grosbeak was so close to where I bird that I felt comfortable just walking several blocks over to see that bird.
This is a term that I came up with. It's called the bips.
The bips.
The bips. So, and this kind of continues on what we've just been talking about. So, have you ever heard of the term the yips?
No.
So the yips is a term in baseball where suddenly a catcher or a pitcher, and this happens to professionals, they just can't throw the ball anymore. So a catcher can't get back to the pitcher. Sometimes it leads to the ending of a career, and sometimes players have had to, go from being a catcher to an outfielder. They do counseling and try to find the root of it. So the bips is when you're in the midst of a crowd, somebody sees a bird, and everyone gets on that bird, and for the life of you, as you try to get your binoculars on it, you just can't do it. And then the bird flies away. And that feeling, and I can see you nodding, so I'm assuming you've been there, right? This is one of my favorite things about having these conversations, talking about these things, is because these are kind of like those shared experiences of all birders. And for me, it was a morning warbler in the North Woods at Central Park. I was near the end of the trail. Somebody called out morning warbler, which was a bird I had never seen. I really wanted to see it for about 3 years. And there I was, everyone's on it. It's right there, just over the brook, and couldn't find it. And it flew away. A walker came down and kind of flushed the bird. And I'll tell you, in the midst of all that, there is this intense emotion that you're feeling. And especially as an adult, you need to keep it together because you're in the midst of a crowd, right? But learning how to deal with that, and speaking to your example with the evening grosbeak, a couple weeks later, there was another morning warbler in Central Park. My son and I, we went to see it, and I saw the bird. I say this more importantly, I then turned to other people in the crowd and helped them get on the bird. And so those experiences, I am introducing children, families to birding in part to make birding more inclusive, more together. And so by spending time with younger people, to really show them that kindness and gratitude, the goal is that that's going to pay off to the birding community as well and make, kinder, more thoughtful birders.
Yeah. I had a BIPS experience recently. I was co-leading a bird outing and could not see the scarlet tanager that everyone else could see. And I mean, a scarlet tanager is like very red.
Yes, gorgeous.
And I have seen scarlet tanagers in real life before, but I just could not discern the bird in the environment I was in. And it's okay. Others could see it. And for me, it was more important for the people who came on to participate in the outing to see the bird than it was for me to see the bird.
Yeah, I've been there, and especially with the scarlet tanager, you're like, it's red and it's around green. Why can't I just see it?
Mm-hmm.
But exactly what you said there, I think, it's a reminder, especially when you're leading a bird walk, that it's okay not to see everything. I think there comes this almost like a pressure. And I think, there's a competitive aspect sometimes that becomes infused into birding, and it doesn't have to be that way. And we're out in nature to really de-stress, right? To focus on the here and now, and that's okay. The birds you see are the birds that you see, and that's a wonderful thing. And so I think the BIPS kind of reminds us of that. It kind of teaches us that lesson.
Mm-hmm.
I'll also say that, in talking to people about the BIPS, you can tell me if you've ever had this experience, but more and more people have shared with me that when they go through that, there's a feeling sometimes of embarrassment. And so they'll pretend they saw the bird rather than, not admit, oh, I missed it or something like that. And I think that also is one of the reasons why I think it's important to talk about the BIPS.
Yeah, I mean, I own up to the fact that I know that you're seeing it, but I just cannot. I think before we get to your third lesson, you in so far have really been explicit and sort of implicit about disappointment as this lesson that one learns through the act of observing birds. And it's kind of a gentle way of being disappointed. There's so many other ways that you will be disappointed in life, and some of them are really painful.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels like when you're out there looking or listening to birds, there are multiple opportunities to be with a particular species. And so this is kind of like a low stress way to experience disappointment, depending on the company you keep. Yeah.
Yeah. I almost call them like scrimmages, right? And that if we have these opportunities to kind of digest these feelings here and process them, when we get into other situations that are more challenging, we kind of have those pathways ready to kind of engage with them. That's the goal.
So what's your third lesson?
Third is a UFO, what I call UFO, an unidentified feathered object. My UFOs have kind of changed as I started birding and to where I am now. And I think now, anytime today that I see a UFO, I am aware that I'm about to learn something new. Framing it in that way, that my unidentified feathered objects are those new opportunities to learn, I get really excited rather than frustrated. Now, that being said, one of the examples I give is I like to bird while I'm jogging, keep an eBird list. And I was going around Hoboken a couple of years ago, and I saw, in November, while the migration is happening, a really large raptor. And I kind of, went through process of elimination, and I settled on, I think that could be a golden eagle. And the bird, went and perched right on the Palisades. And I didn't have my binoculars with me. I had a meeting I had to get to. And I'll never know. I'll never know with certainty, what that bird was. And so learning to kind of A, accept that, but B, what I love about a moment like that is I might not have known the answer then, but I've learned enough since. And because I paid attention, I can go back and, delineate, oh, wait a minute, that's what I was seeing. And
Mm.
so, and I loved seeing that process play out with other people, especially new birders, where sometimes we forget at the beginning of our birding career, I didn't know what a grackle was. And then I kept learning and I said, oh my goodness, I saw a grackle, right? And so
Yeah.
getting to observe that in a current birder is really, really fun. And I'm sure you've had the experience where somebody will see a bird and tell me what it is, and describe it to me. Was it on the ground? Was it in a tree? What colors did you notice? And can say, oh, that was a starling, and then show them a picture. Your UFOs kind of become kind of like this barometer for your own growth.
Yeah. A recent experience, it was that same outing where I did not see the scarlet tanager. I only realized after the fact that I was doing this thing that I'm about to describe. But when I would see a bird, I would not only say, oh, you use the clock if you're looking at a tree, whether it's 12 or 6 or 10,
Mm-hmm.
but then I started just describing what I was seeing. So it wasn't just about, oh, there's a bird at 10 o'clock in this tree, but I found myself talking about, especially the plumage, because it's spring migration of these
Mm-hmm.
birds. And I don't think I had ever done that before.
Mm.
And a couple days after the outing, just reflecting on it, I was like, oh, I did that. And I remember mentors of mine
Mm.
doing that because you need those feel marks, burnt in your brain.
Yeah.
So that it's just you see, that pattern language and you can immediately say, oh, that's that bird. You don't even
That's
have to
great.
sort of like spend a lot of time putting the parts together. Your brain just
Mm-hmm.
recognizes it as
Yes.
the bird. But you need, at least for me, you need someone to tell you what it is you're looking at, and knowing that rose-breasted grosbeak looks like this, or the
Mm-hmm.
house finch the female looks like this, and the purple finch female looks like this. So just having that sort of language becomes really important with birding. I was pretty happy with myself for doing that.
I was going to tell people listening, you have such a big smile on your face as you're recounting this and putting it together. And this kind of, going through process, I really believe, and that's why all three of these, quote unquote, disappointments, negative experiences, I think it's important for birders to kind of reflect on them, because it's unlike any other, sport or hobby or discipline where you don't get like a white belt and then a yellow belt and then a
Mm,
black belt, right? But there's clearly very specific processes that we all go through. You were doing that on your own, kind of, oh yeah, this used to be done for me and now I'm doing it for others. That really brings joy to the process, and you're going to keep growing, right? So with
mhm.
all that you know now, what's that going to be like in the future?
Exactly. I am always so impressed when I read the latest research coming out of ornithology. You think, oh, someone else knows so much more than me. And then you
Mm-hmm.
read new science and you're like, oh, yeah, there is so much more to
Yeah,
know.
endless,
Yeah,
endless.
endless.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about Hoboken, actually. I would venture to say, in sort of popular understandings of bird richness and diversity, that Hoboken would not be on people's list of like top places to go and see birds. Well, let's disabuse people of that myth. Let us know, what birds have you seen in Hoboken?
Yes, we're much more than great fresh mozzarella. We have birds as well. I keep a city list and I keep a backyard list. So I have a condo on the first floor and we have a little yard out back, and keeping what you were saying about, you have your little patch that you love to watch. I think birding Hoboken for me has become my favorite thing to see just how many species there are here. So I'm about to hit 100 species for Hoboken. I love that it's a well-kept secret. And I love that here I am with my son, here I am with these elementary school students and their parents, and we are noticing all of these amazing things that so many people don't notice. And so, again, that's like cherishing those surprises is really what my goal is as a birder, and inciting those surprises for others is really what I celebrate. So a couple of birds that stick out in kind of my birding history over the course of the migration. I think what's happening, and I love Central Park. I bird Central Park a ton. That's really where I learned how to bird. And what I think happens is, a lot of the birds will kind of head into Central Park, but for whatever reason, they might fall short and end up on the Palisades along the cliffs of Hoboken on our east side. And so Stevens University, the college, the Institute of Technology, they have a really nice campus with lots of trees all along that cliff. That'll bring in really, really wonderful birds throughout the fall and the spring. First time I ever had my breath actually taken away, I was, walking along a parking lot by a dorm, and there was a dumpster and a porta-john and a little shrub. And I looked up, and it was an indigo bunting. And I said, "Is that an indigo?" And I just, couldn't believe it, because I really wasn't expecting that. The rose-breasted grosbeak, my son and I just spotted last week. I'll never forget, in the midst of pandemic 2020, there was a snowstorm on March, I believe, 15th, watching black-throated blue warbler in the trees in the midst of the snow. I was once coming out of my house, and I park across the street in a lot, and I'm sure you can, relate to this as a birder. You're just always attuned to the birds around you. And I got into my car, and I just looked, and I saw a bird underneath a parked car right outside of my garage. And I said, "That's bigger than a house sparrow, and it's just odd." And it didn't move. And I pulled my car out, and it stayed in the same spot. And I rolled down my window, and sure enough, it was a Virginia rail.
Oh my goodness.
And so there's a Virginia rail, as part of my, yard list now. Yeah. And again, a lot of these birds will kind of head off to get to the Meadowlands or maybe Central Park. And for whatever reason, they fall short, and they'll kind of fall out into Hoboken. It's just a treasure, really. I've heard stories, and this is kind of an interesting one that kind of tells the history of Hoboken. Old timers here will tell me that nighthawks used to visit Hoboken all the time. And over the course of the last 30 years or so, that changed. And the reason that changed was because they used to basically, paper over the roofs of the old buildings, and flies would come and basically hatch on them. But now, because of the, either the metal roofs or the silicone, you don't get those hatches, and you really don't get those nighthawks. There's one asterisk. My son and I were out birding this fall, and we actually saw nighthawks over the marsh by the light rail in the back of the city. That's a really interesting one for me. And it kind of reminds me, anyone I tell the story to, that, birds are so connected to cities, our environment, and the decisions we make. And, I would love to bring them back. And so having a conversation like that, now I'm talking to council people, encouraging them to, hey, what are other birds that we can think about as we are building and designing our buildings?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think also the fact that there's this memory, right, of birds that used to be more common in Hoboken. And, those folks sharing that story with you and being able to identify like the cause of the decline in that species. And maybe we don't want to use tar paper roofs, but maybe there's another alternative. This greater acknowledgement that human activities often have an outsized impact on the lives of other species. Yes, cities can be a really great respite and home for a lot of different kinds of bird species. And it's really up to us to support their populations.
Absolutely.
So, where do you see your future in birding? You're doing these bird walks. You're now talking to City Council maybe about urban design and bird populations in Hoboken. I suppose, where do you see yourself as a birder maybe in the next 5 years?
It's a great question. What comes to mind is really sharing and teaching um, issues related to birds, people, and kind of all those intersections, sharing them and teaching them to young birders, to families, and really to everyone. I think it's so important. And I love having those conversations where people go, "Oh, yeah, I never thought about that." And then you never know where that's going to go. Absolutely continuing to lead bird walks, not just here in Hoboken, but in other places as well. And actually, so my son, he has really kind of fallen in love with birding. And he also goes to a dual language school, so he's fluent in Spanish. So the two of us now kind of want to lead guides together. And of course, kind of bilingual. He has the Kaufman Field Guide. So he's learning the Spanish names for, the birds that he knows in English, which is really wonderful. In addition to that, just finding other ways of kind of bringing communities together to kind of see birds as their neighbors, as their feathered neighbors who are right outside their window.
Yeah, that's quite a ambitious but also doable goal, right? Just from speaking to you, it sounds like you have made an impact on so many people, like young people and families in Hoboken. And I'm really glad that we connected. I definitely want to come to Hoboken and bird along the Palisades.
I would love to show you around.
Jeffrey, I'd like to leave our listeners with this question to you. Please tell us about your plans for writing about the art of making mistakes to learn your birds.
One of my goals certainly is to send multiple pieces about writing, about birding, and about the process of learning birding out there. I think it's a really important conversation to have. Speaking to you, speaking to other people, I love seeing people connect through birding. And I think this idea about the process of mistakes and how they lead to, wonderful discoveries is something we all share. And so absolutely writing articles, but also kind of a bigger, broader scope to kind of do a book about this and to meet with other birders, to meet with other people, to kind of tell these stories and discover these shared connections. Just last night, I was talking to someone, and I'll even share that when I was talking to the individual, I wouldn't have guessed that they would have been so open to the idea of mistakes. And the person was so effusive and said, this is someone I see as like an expert, in quote unquote, and said, absolutely, what frustrates him is that when he's in the field, he sees so many new birders who are afraid to just call out a bird. And he tells them, call it out, be wrong. And he actually, I was interviewing him. He gave me a story. And what he said was that I was once wrong about a bird, and it turned out to be an even better bird. He thought he had a pretty good bird, and it ended up being something, mega rare. Okay. So I'm just seeing so many amazing stories about people's mistakes, which we kind of tend to only talk about the quote unquote successes, the bird that I finally got to see. And I think those other birds that we miss or that we, mistake, we tend not to talk about, but they actually reveal a little bit more of our story, I think.
Yeah. I can think of bird-related books I've read in the last several years. The framing of the book is about, okay, here is this bird species that I saw or spent time with, and mistakes are definitely not at the forefront of the book. And really, that's kind of how most people learn, right? Is through flubbing something, misidentifying something, solving that maths problem incorrectly. And you learn through doing, and through doing, there are often mistakes and missteps. And it's really nice to celebrate it because there's actually nothing bad about making mistakes. It's
No,
part of being a human person.
totally. Makes you a human and a birder.
Yeah. And I think actually then makes birding more accessible because people won't feel that they need to be at a certain level before they can enter the birding community or to feel free in a conversation about birds, that you will be accepted in spite of your mistakes or despite your mistakes. It's just a natural part of learning.
Totally. No gatekeeping, right? No, yeah.
Yes.
Everybody can be a birder, and birders make mistakes constantly.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, to anyone listening, I would love to hear your stories too. Throughout our conversation today, if you found yourself thinking about, a time that you dipped or a time that you saw a UFO and then figured out that UFO, or a time that you got overtaken by the bips, I would love to hear your story. I think I'm starting to love hearing these stories, maybe even more than hearing about people's, successes. I think they reveal a little bit more. While we're talking about it, I'll share that I bird with a lot of families and, kids. And one of the ways that I get them to kind of just embrace this idea, and I think kids today actually need just as much illustration to kind of be open to embracing mistakes without giving themselves a hard time or getting frustrated. It's my mistake song. The mistake song. It's very catchy now. This might be the new summer song. I make mistakes. You make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Ugh.
I love it. We'll have to find like a beat to go behind that. So for folks who want to share their stories of mistakes, misidentifications with you, where can people find you?
So I'm on Instagram, Mr. Train _ MRTRAIN _. And you could also email me, mrtrain@mrtrain.org. No periods.
I'll put both those contact information pieces in the show notes.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I look forward to your publications, both articles and the eventual book.
I appreciate it. I'll come back on here for the launch party.
All right, that's a date then.
Excellent.
Yeah, Jeffrey, thank you so much. This was a great conversation.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here and grateful to have this chat with you as well.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Your Bird Story. Tune in on the second Thursday of next month for the next episode. In the meantime, explore our archives, like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Your Bird Story is edited and produced by Pod to the People. Your Bird Story is an initiative of Local Nature Lab.